Yo. Okay, so I'm gonna do this one more time. So I happened across kind of an interesting like science problem last night when I was playing around with making some homemade Nerf darts. Right? So the way I normally do it is you take a piece of foam, I wrap it in a bit of plastic to make it a little bit more rigid so that then I can poke a hole in it so that it fits in the Nerf gun. Because if you look at the Nerf guns, they've got these little posts inside there, so it needs a hole in it. And then I use like a hot soldering iron or something to make a little pocket in one end, just like that. And then I take like a pebble or something and I drop it in there, and then I cover it with a little glue. And when it's done, it looks like this, right? So you can see the little pebble in there covered with some glue, okay? And they work really well, and it's kind of fun. But I had an instance of two of these homemade Nerf darts that looked visually identical. So they looked exactly the same. And let me just label them so we can tell them apart. So let's say we have a foo dart and a bar dart. And the interesting thing was, the foo dart worked perfectly every time. And the bar dart would always just go boop. It would not work at all. And this one would go like 75 feet. It just flies. So, but they look identical. And you might be like, well, this is an easy answer, right? There's just something that's snagging on the one that's not working. Or there's something, you know, on the outside of it that's a little bit sticky. Or it's the wrong weight. Or it's a little bit too thick or too thin, and so the air is blowing past it, or something like that. And that's fair. But, so I'm initially trying these out all in this Nerf gun. And that's where it's having this weird problem. But in this one, they both work beautifully. They both work perfectly fine. They both go absolutely flying, like 75 feet, and they both go the same. So there's nothing inherently wrong with the bar darts, but it just doesn't work at all in this specific Nerf gun. So I was kind of intrigued. I was like, okay, this is a puzzle. What's going on here? So my first thought was that this one had a little bit tighter chamber, right? And so perhaps the air was going past it a little bit in this one, and so it was all escaping, taking the path of least resistance and not pushing it at all, whereas in this one, just a little bit tighter, still within the, like, it works for Nerf things, but it just got them both to pop out. I tested for that, and these are actually the two darts in question, right? And so I took, this is the bar dart, right? And I wrapped it in a little bit of tape. And you'll notice that it fits fine in both of them, right? So it's not too tight. It takes a little bit more wiggling. But it still works great out of this one. It actually works amazing. And it fits really snugly in the other one, too. But it still does not shoot at all. So there's something else going on. And so I kept digging. So the first thing I figured out, so yeah, let me draw a picture real quick. So if we say that this, so let's say this is the barrel of the revolver one, right? So this is part of this chamber guy, right? Or cylinder. So just to clarify here, these are the outer walls, right? And there's a little peg, which I showed you before, if I didn't, in all of these, right? And that peg is just to fit in that hole in the middle of the dart, so it holds it in place, right? So that's pretty straightforward. And then there's these little gaps in the back, and I can show you that, right? So little gaps in the back, you can see those. So the air can still go through into the chamber, right? And then let's say there's the back area here, and there is a little gap there, and that's important, right? There's a gap thing here, and there's a piston thingy in here that's got springs and stuff on it, and it comes whacking forward, right? And that creates a lot of air pressure, and that pushes out the Nerf dart, right? So oversimplified, but that's the basic idea, right? So the first thing I discovered was that the bar dart was not, the bar dart was not sitting all the way flush with the back of the chamber, whereas the foo dart was. So it would sit, you know, like this. Okay? And my first thought was that, you know, perhaps there was some sort of snag or something that was preventing the bar dart from going all the way in. But as far as I can tell, and I tried a couple different things, there was not, right? And I don't know if I already mentioned this, but my first thought was that the bar dart was a little bit too thin and it was getting some air escaping past it. But I also tested that by making it a little bit thicker, kind of like this. And that didn't change it. It still didn't work, and it still worked fine in this one. So that was not the issue, in case I forgot to say that. So it turns out, and my initial thought there, right, so it turns out, I'll tell you the answer, is that when I cut the holes in these, right, because there's a hole poked in them, and this is hard to see from the outside, it doesn't matter that the thickness of this doesn't matter, it's the depth that matters. This one did not have as deep of a hole poked in it. And so when that interacts with this post, right, it doesn't fit all the way back, whereas the other one does. So that's the first discovery. That was the main gotcha here. But the second, and also kind of interesting gotcha, is why that matters. Because in this one, right, I could push them not all the way back and they both still work fine. So my thought was perhaps because this is a revolver kind of thing, right, and this is true in real revolvers too, right, that because there's a gap here, that some of the air pressure can escape, right? So I'm going to draw my air pressure as being red, right? So some of the air pressure is escaping through this little gap, and that's true, right? So my thought was because this is not all the way back, it leaves there more room for this to all escape. But that turns out not to be the real cause. The real cause is actually there's another piece in here, and I'm going to draw it in. Blue, okay? And it sits right here. And the reason it's here is because if you shoot the Nerf gun without a dart in it, this piston thingy that slams forward does not have anything to resist that forward slam. And so it would close so fast that it would actually break and crack the components. So what this little blue thingy does is if there's no dart here, and I can show it to you, right? It's that little peg right here, this one. And you can see kind of that it does actually push in when there's a dart in there. So it pushes in. Okay? So again, I'm drawing that piece as this blue thing here. So if there's no dart, it pushes in and it seals this thing here. So it acts as if there's a dart there, because when you pull the trigger then, this piston still has air resistance here at this opening, and so it closes much more slowly as the air just seeps out around that piston. But if there is a dart there, then that little blue thing is pushed in by the dart, and the hole is left open, and the air can go out the hole and fire the dart. So what was happening, and you probably already can tell now, is that this, This dart, when it was seating all the way back, it was fully depressing that blue piece, that air restrictor, right? The dry fire protector. But with the other one, which was not sitting all the way back, right? It was not fully depressing that air restrictor, and so only a little bit of air was getting by it, and so it caused the bloop effect, right? And I was able to test that for sure by poking the hole a little deeper in this one and getting it to sit all the way in, and then it suddenly started working perfectly fine. So that was kind of an interesting puzzle. Thanks for listening.